When most people think of World War II, images of battlefields, tanks and rationed meals come to mind. But behind the front lines, soldiers and civilians faced an equally relentless enemy-cold, wet conditions with limited fuel and no access to modern heating. In these harsh circumstances, a deceptively simple invention emerged: the hidden mud stove. Unlike conventional stoves, this low-tech creation burned efficiently, produced minimal smoke, and could be built almost anywhere using mud, clay, and a few scavenged materials. Today, we're diving into how this stove worked, why it was so effective, and how backyard enthusiasts, survivalists, and historical reenactors can replicate its principles today. Why traditional fires failed in winter conditions. Open fires were the most obvious solution, but they came with serious drawbacks. In freezing or windy environments, flames were unreliable, fuel burned quickly, and smoke gave away positions. Indoor fires often resulted in smoke-filled shelters, wetting clothes and bedding, and increasing the risk of respiratory issues. When fuel was scarce, every log or scrap of wood had to be used efficiently. The hidden mud stove was a solution that addressed all these problems simultaneously. By channeling heat, controlling airflow, and minimizing combustion waste, it allowed soldiers and civilians to cook, heat, and survive with minimal resources. How the hidden mud stove was constructed. The stove was simple in concept but precise in execution. At its core, it consisted of a mud and clay structure built to hold a fire chamber, a flue, and an insulated cooking surface. So, soldiers or civilians would dig a small base pit, shape it with mud and clay, and create a hollow cavity for the fuel. A narrow chimney or flue directed smoke upward and away from the user, while also encouraging a strong draft that allowed fuel to burn completely. Some versions, incorporated small vents that introduced air precisely where it was needed, ensuring more complete combustion and less smoke. The beauty of this design really lay in its adaptability. Depending on the environment, it could be freestanding or built against a wall of a shelter. The materials were abundant: mud, clay, and sometimes straw or grass for reinforcement. But honestly, the geometry and airflow were key. Even small mistakes in shaping the flue or fire chamber could reduce efficiency, which is why soldiers often learned the design through observation and trial. Why this stove burned so cleanly? The clean burning nature of the mud stove came from its controlled airflow and insulation. Traditional open fires lost heat quickly and produced a lot of smoke because combustion was incomplete. The mud stove, however, trapped heat in the insulated chamber, forcing flames to fully consume the fuel before exiting the flue. This reduced smoke dramatically, kept the immediate area safer for breathing, and maximized fuel efficiency. This principle is still relevant today. If you want a backyard or survival stove that uses less wood and produces less smoke, focus on airflow, insulation, and directing flames in a confined chamber. Even without historical mud, modern versions can use fire bricks, clay, or cob mixtures to replicate the effect. Now, how did soldiers and civilians use the stove out in the field? Well, during World War II, soldiers mainly relied on these stoves to heat small shelters and, of course, to cook their meals. The stove's small footprint, you see, allowed them to hide it from enemy view or even build it inside a partially covered trench. Civilians living in occupied or war-torn areas used the very same idea to cook indoors safely, especially during those harsh winters. The stoves were really quite adaptable. The fire chamber could be adjusted for small cooking fires, or, made a bit larger for warming several people at once. Even when only a few sticks or scraps were available, the stove's efficiency meant that it could provide usable heat and a stable cooking surface. For modern backyard use, this translates into practical steps. You can dig a small pit, reinforce it with clay and mud, shape a fire chamber with a narrow chimney, and start with small fuel pieces. And, experiment with airflow by adjusting openings, and notice how much less smoke is produced compared to a conventional open fire. With a little patience, you can achieve both efficiency and safety, just like World War II builders did under extreme conditions. The hidden mud stove teaches us an important lesson. Efficiency really comes from understanding natural principles, not just relying solely on modern technology. By controlling airflow, insulating heat, and shaping a combustion chamber, you can drastically reduce fuel consumption while still producing clean heat. This applies not only to historical curiosity, but also to modern backyard ovens, survival shelters, or even emergency preparedness kits. Whether you're a history enthusiast, wanting to recreate authentic wartime survival strategies, a survivalist aiming for low-fuel solutions, or, just a backyard tinkerer looking for innovative ways to cook and heat, the mud stove offers insight into simple, sustainable design. Its ingenuity reminds us that sometimes the best solutions are the ones that work quietly, efficiently, and with materials at hand. If you found this exploration of World War II ingenuity fascinating, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and, share this video. Preserving and applying these historical survival techniques ensures that we don't just admire the past. We learn from it and honestly carry its lessons forward into our own practical lives.